Hey everyone, this is Mason and you're listening to HerbRally. Today's episode is another edition of the Herbalist Hour, and this time I'm joined by herbalist and author Erin Masako Wilkins. So Erin recently wrote a book called Asian American Herbalism, Traditional and Modern Healing Practices for Everyday Wellness. And in this conversation, we chat about the influence of her grandma, the 3 principles of Asian American herbalism, mushroom rice wine vinegar, her love of loquats, advice to the aspiring author, as well as we chat a bunch about her new book. So a huge thanks to Erin for joining me on the show. Also, big shout out and thanks to our presenting sponsor, and that is our HerbRally Schoolhouse members. So if you're an HerbRally Schoolhouse member, thank you so much. We really could not do this without you. Your monthly financial support really keeps the lights on here at HerbRally and the podcast going and everything else that we do here at HerbRally, so we really appreciate it. If you'd like to learn more about the HerbRally Schoolhouse, simply head to herbrally.com/schoolhouse. And if you'd like to get your first 30 days for free, use coupon code podcast at checkout. Then it's only $10 a month after that. So we try to keep it as affordable as possible. That's going to do it for me today. Thanks once again for listening, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and the flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Umami, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
Welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. Today I'm really excited to have on Erin Masako Wilkins. Welcome to the show, Erin.
Hey, Mason. Thanks so much for having me.
You just came out with a book, well, I want to say within the past couple of years. It's called Asian American Herbalism, so we're going to chat a bunch about that. But a lot of times I like to start these shows going way back, and I know you kind of start your book chatting about one of your grandmas, Masako. I'm just kind of curious how she influenced your life, your herbalism, the way you see the world. So can you take us back maybe to hanging out in Masako's kitchen and all of that?
Yeah. This is a great way to start, and thank you for that question. The way I think and the way I work is very circular. So I'm going to begin right in the middle of it all. In acupuncture school in my early 20s, that's where my formal herbalist training started, in a traditional Chinese medicine clinic surrounded by little wooden boxes with hundreds of herbs.
Mm.
And in that program, in that clinic, I saw that many of the herbs on the wall were things that I recognized from my grandmother's kitchen. And that was such a important moment in my journey of becoming an herbalist, is really connecting the clinical piece, the textbooks, and working with clients to some of my most precious childhood memories growing up in my grandma's kitchen. And so I chose early on in my practice to focus on herbs that grow well where we live in California. So chrysanthemum, mugwort, dandelion, loquat, honeysuckle, and then also herbs that, again, to the kitchen and to the local markets or Asian grocery stores, things we can find like burdock root, ginger, mint, citrus, green tea, keeping it really simple. And I think that also speaks to kind of accessibility in herbalism.
Totally.
So my herbal journey now, I look back and it did start in my grandma's kitchen, but I don't think I realized that when I entered herb school. I don't think I came into acupuncture and herb school with like, I'm an Asian American herbalist, and the identity piece came later on down the line.
You mentioned loquat, and I see loquat all over your Instagram feed, and I have almost no experience with that fruit. Can you tell us why you love that plant?
Yeah. So growing up in local Asian markets, there is a kind of a classic TCM loquat cough syrup, and it does exactly what you would think. It's a cough syrup. However, when I ordered some when my children were really young, it has artificial flavor in it. And one of my kids cannot. She will go cuckoo bananas with artificial flavor and color. So that was my first instinct, like, oh, well, I wonder if I can make this. And so I did some research, and it's actually the loquat leaf that holds the most medicine. And also, and this ties into the Asian American herbalism piece, my mom has loquat trees in her backyard. So bingo. It's easy to source. A recipe in the book is the syrup that I ended up making for my family. And it's kind of similar to making elderberry syrup, but instead of elderberries, I use dried or fresh loquat leaves, throw in a stick of cinnamon, a knob of ginger, maybe some licorice root, and decoct that down, add honey. And it's actually really delicious. And I like to use it for cough, but also just kind of to add into the mix during like cold and flu season.
Yeah, that sounds delicious. Are there any other foods that your grandma would make that you kind of continue to this day to make in the kitchen yourself?
Yeah, things like, of course, miso soup,
Yeah,
things that are just delicious.
totally.
Adding seaweeds and mushrooms to just everyday rice bowls. But one thing that she still to this day drinks every day is gunmai cha green tea.
Oh, I love that tea.
Good,
So
savory.
good.
That toasted brown rice is a savory kind of flavor.
Absolutely.
And so like right now I'm drinking green tea and what's really cool, and I pulled this from some of the traditional Chinese medicine textbooks. Green tea as a medicinal or an herb, but you don't always think of tea. I don't always think of tea as an herb.
Right.
Now I do. And I drink green tea because it is a chi tonic, meaning it helps to build or boost chi within the body or energy in our body. And I find it's really great for discernment. So, yes, there's caffeine and it can kind of give that bump, but I really look at green tea as building chi and energy in the body and almost more importantly in the mind head.
Yeah, I used to work for a company called Mountain Rose Herbs, and they used to sell Genmai cha, and that was one of the first green teas that I really started falling in love with. Like you said, it's got like that toasty, savory flavor. Also, I just randomly saw earlier today that you follow the Eugene Tea Festival. I'm not sure if you went last year or not, but or if you're familiar with the event. I'm actually on the board of directors of that nonprofit, the Eugene Tea Festival. So yeah, I just thought that was a cool connection. But do you go to these tea events? Do you teach at any of them?
I just found the Eugene Tea Festival and I followed them because I was like, I want to go.
Yeah, you should.
I want to go. That's why I started following. And I recently, since the pandemic, built out a product line. So herbal
Oh,
tea, Asian American Herbalism product line. And so I'm also hoping in the future to go for fun and maybe also table, share my wares,
totally.
um, community. So I haven't been yet, but it actually is on my list of things I'd love to do.
Awesome. Yeah, the Portland Tea Festival is also amazing as well. So I'm actually interviewing the executive director, Madeline Au, next week, I want to say, so to help promote that event. But definitely recommend checking it out. What a great tea community up there in the Pacific Northwest. Um, you mentioned herb school a couple times. I'm curious, uh, was your herb school in association with your acupuncture school, or did you do acupuncture school? And did you also have, say, like herb mentors on the side? Who have been some of your herbal mentors along your journey?
Oh, yes. Probably the most important herb question you ask
Totally.
folks is like, who have we learned from?
I love hearing the lineages, it's always fascinating to me.
Ah, so it varies from state to state. I entered herbalism clinically through acupuncture school, and in California, the licensure is it's acupuncture and herbs. So the schools have both. Other states it can be separate.
Okay.
And it's a good chunk. I would say like 25 to 30% of the acupuncture school I went to in Berkeley, it's the Acupuncture and Integrative Medicine College, Berkeley, California, was herbs.
Hmm.
So deep materia medica, learning the herbs individually, and then in Dui Yao or in pairs, and then
Hmm.
in formulas. And then also, of course, there was hundreds, maybe thousands of hours of clinical as well, which was really incredible. And I think a lot of learning takes place. And so within that program, one of my greatest teachers, it was Dr. Hualing Xu, and she taught herbs. She had it actually, some people were quite scared of her. She had a reputation for being a badass. So for myself, I was like, that's who I want to learn from.
Were they intimidated by her, or her teaching methods were kind of like hardcore?
Hardcore teaching methods, very dogmatic, very strong in her perspective, and that really influenced her teaching. She was both a allopathic or biomedicine trained doctor, OBGYN, and an acupuncturist herbalist, trained in China. And so her teaching really influenced me, especially in my first 5 years of clinical practice after school,
Yeah.
of raw Chinese medicine decoctions based on formulas, classical formulas. I wasn't really formulating myself in the beginning, which I think was valuable, to rely on the teachings of my mentor and then the generations before me. And so she just taught me that it's okay to be hard. It's okay to have strong opinions about the medicine and communicate with clients and patients that, sometimes the most bitter medicine is the strongest medicine, and you're taking it because of these reasons, and we want it to be effective. And so her teaching was, and still is, so fundamental to who I am as an herbalist. Yeah. And then also there was another teacher, very different vibe in school, Hideko Peltzer, Japanese American. She taught more like Japanese energetic medicine, how to do acupuncture without putting a needle in the body. And from her, I really learned the nuance and the cultural feeling of what is ultimately my ancestral medicine and Japanese herbalism. So the two, and both women teachers, it's kind of like the yin and the yang of my mentorship.
Okay, thanks for sharing. Well, let's get into the book a little bit. So, again, it's Asian American Herbalism. I don't know if there's a subtitle or not.
There is a long subtitle. The publishers had me do a subtitle: Traditional and Modern Healing Practices for Everyday Wellness.
Awesome. So in chapter 2, you have a section called Why Asian American Herbalism, which almost seems more like a statement. So I was hoping you could chat a little bit about, well, why Asian American Herbalism?
So early on in my practice, I just simply called my work East-West Herbalism. So that was a really common sense way to describe what I was doing. All of my work is rooted, centered in the East Asian, Chinese, and Japanese herbal tradition. But of course, with a modern day twist, just the practicalities of working in California, having learned in English. There's just so many nuances that don't make my work hard line traditional. And then it was during the pandemic, 2020, and I had to shut down my brick and mortar herb shop and my acupuncture practice. I became a homeschool teacher to my young children. I was doing a lot of soul searching, I think.
Sure.
Maybe you can relate.
Absolutely. I remember those days.
Yeah, a lot of sitting in my yard with this like existential crisis. And one of the things that came out of that was really profound was looking at how I use language to describe what I do and who I am as a person. And I had this simple realization: I'm not an East-West person. I don't necessarily believe that herbalism is Eastern or Western. And I just had these words come to me of like, I really identify as an Asian American herbalist. And as I started to kind of share about that, like on social media, I had colleagues and friends and folks in the Asian community come forward of like, hey, that language speaks to me too. And so as I wrote the book, the question I kept referring to for myself is, what does it mean to practice traditional Asian herbalism in the context of modern day life?
Yeah, and that's what you seek to answer throughout the book. Yeah, I dig it. And on your Instagram, you also posted this three principles of Asian American herbalists, which I know they're also in the book as well. So I was thinking we could just kind of go through those three principles and you kind of expound upon each one of them.
Sure.
So the first one we'll start with is heal locally. So what does that mean to you?
You know, heal locally. So all of these principles, I wrote them at the end of
Oh,
of my
really?
writing. I did. I
Okay.
wrote, I pulled out everything I knew. And then at the end, I was like, okay, well, why does this matter?
Yeah.
Why do my tea recipes, what am I trying to say?
Yeah.
And even that idea, heal locally, I think as a fellow herbalist, there's just a gut reaction of like, well, duh,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, we all vibe with that already for sure. I like it though.
right? And
Yeah.
like kind of thinking back to all of our ancestors, we weren't drop shipping herbs
Right.
across the world, right? Like
Yeah.
I think it speaks to the roots of this medicine that we source from what we have available, whether it's in our kitchen, our garden, our community. And I think that's how it's always gone down. And spiritually speaks to this idea that, and I believe we share a resonance with the herbs that grow near us in our bioregion.
You mentioned like dandelion earlier. How much are you talking about, say, the weedy herbs in the book?
Yeah, I would say the weeds are the queens.
Uh-huh.
Definitely, definitely. There's something that influenced my herbalism in my garden. So I am not a good gardener. Like I'm one of the like herbalists who do not fit into this like image of like having a beautiful garden on acres. That's just not my reality. In my herb garden, to survive in my herb garden, you have to be able to come back each year with very little fuss. Water is coming from rain. It's not,
Right. Right,
I'm
right.
not watering my garden. So the weeds are what survive in my garden, like yarrow, calendula, mugwort, chrysanthemum, dandelion. Those are all key to my practice personally and professionally.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're still selling oh shoot, I forgot the name. How is this happening to me right now? Mugwort, um,
Hmm. Hmm.
moxa, that's the
Oh
word.
yeah,
Do you
yeah,
make moxa from the mugwort that's growing in your yard, or because I know you used to sell those products, but I don't think you do anymore. Or maybe I'm
yeah. My product sales are kind of like this.
okay, sure.
I, I'll tend to sell moxa when I'm teaching like moxibustion classes a lot. So depending on who's listening at any given moment in time,
Okay.
maybe I might be. Um, I don't make moxa. It's such a labor-intensive process. I think it's a worthwhile practice to try out for people who are interested in moxibustion, which is a processed mugwort leaf that's used for heat therapy, kind of like burning a cottony incense over the body.
Yeah. And you're doing that in your acupuncture practice? You're doing
Yes,
moxa? Yeah, okay. Awesome.
yes, and moxibustion also is a really important piece of Japanese
Hmm.
acupuncture and healing traditions. And so it's just really spoken to me in my practice. Yeah,
I love that. I would love to talk to you later on if you'd be willing to. It's kind of maybe a taboo subject, but I think it's an important one. Maybe
mm,
we'll get to it later, but I would like to hear you talk about, say, cultural appropriation versus appreciation. And the reason I bring that up is because I did read it in your book. You actually do address it, so I'd be curious your thoughts. But before we get there, why don't we keep
sure.
going through these three principles? The second one you have here is for the earth.
Yeah. And again, had to really sit down and free write, pencil to paper. And what came forward was, I think even internally, I've had over the years this misconception that because herbal medicine is of the earth, that maybe it's a more ethical or earth friendly type practice. But I found in sourcing, I mean, working for Mountain Rose, which is I look at it as such like a ethical, incredible, like a leader in
Totally.
ethical herbalism.
Absolutely.
However, outside of that, we can source herbs from around the world where there might be human exploitation, environmental considerations, supply chain issues, quality issues. And so sourcing from really ethical companies,
Yeah.
brands is, I think, is important as ever. Uh, so that's one piece, the sourcing. The other piece with climate collapse and increasing demand and over harvesting is I think we need to be vigilant, of course, of like threatened or endangered plants, like
Mm,
the work like United Plant Savers is doing. And I'm sure there's so many more organizations doing this work
absolutely.
too. So considering not only the plants we're going to use or that we should be using, but what are the herbs that we want to pass down to the next generation?
Yeah.
I think I heard in your previous podcast that you're a father. And
Uh-huh.
so
Yeah.
maybe that's something also that you're considering now as we're parents of like, okay, not just what are we using, but what are we sharing with our children?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've always said I want my daughter to take this herbal natural lifestyle for granted, which is kind of a weird way to say it. I kind of want her to just like have this be in the background, like this is just how life is, and then she could focus on some other things. She doesn't have to be the herbalist. She's almost like, say, an herbalist by default, just because that's how she kind of grew up, getting the nourishing herbal infusions all the
Mm.
time. So, absolutely, yeah. I shared that story one time with another herbal company, and they misquoted me. They said they don't want her to take it for granted, but I do want her to take it for granted, which seems kind of silly, but
I
yeah,
like that.
yeah. Thanks. You mentioned sourcing herbs, and I've actually was curious. I know you also are a fan of, is it jujube date? Did I say that
Oh,
right?
oh yeah.
I'm because working at Mountain Rose Herbs, that's a herb we never sold, and I'm just kind of curious. Do you have a good ethical source for purchasing jujube dates anywhere?
You know, um the supplier for traditional Chinese herbs, uh Springwind Herbs, Springwind Herbs,
I don't. Oh,
San Leandro, Bay Area.
okay.
The person who runs that is Andrew Ellis or Andy Ellis. He is one of the authors on the major Chinese herbal medicine textbooks. And he is, I mean, he's such a badass. I
Okay.
really have so much respect for Andy.
Sweet.
He has personal relationships with the various farms he sources from in China. And then once he gets in his herbs, he tests them again to make sure that they're of a high quality. And then he just is very transparent. These are organic. These are no detect pesticide. These are conventional. And so for jujube dates, I would look to Springwind Herbs.
Okay. I will find them online or ask you to email me a link, and I'll include that in the podcast show notes and the YouTube description. So, yeah,
Cool.
that's another one along with like loquat. I've never had any experience with jujube date just because I never was able to really source it. So, um, I do have what are those medjool dates upstairs right now, but those are probably not the same thing.
There's not, but it's relevant.
Related?
That there's crossover
Okay.
medicinally. And what I'll also say about jujube dates, I should have said first, is that any Asian market in your community
Oh,
will have them.
I love the Asian market. I always get kaffir lime leaves there, lemongrass, and what's the other one? Galangal root.
Oh,
Yeah, I'll look
yes.
for the jujube dates next time.
Yeah.
So the third principle in your book is health justice.
Mm, hmm This is a big one, and it actually, so before I was an herbalist, I almost went to law school.
Oh,
That would not have gone well for me.
that's a
But I'm
different career
always,
path.
that's not how my brain works. But the heart of why I wanted to do that was a strong sense of justice and equity. And so when I started practicing acupuncture, I quickly realized the lack of accessibility, the kind of homogeny, and the people who are able to come in, not just for odd treatment, but for consistent holistic care. And it coming from a very working class family. My grandparents were farm laborers. I come from teachers and conservationists. Quickly, I realized access is an issue, can be an issue. Um, And so part of my teaching and writing, and even in this book, was uh, creating ways for people to access traditional knowledge that's been historically gatekept. And in doing so and sharing freely, the hope is that for folks of Asian heritage, specifically, to reclaim this medicine with really a sense of pride.
Yeah.
Because growing up Asian in America is not all butterflies and rainbows. There's a lot, I think, that model minority myth and being marginalized and having gone through various, not just bias, but like generational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
There's something really powerful about being able to see the beauty and significance of our culture through something like herbalism.
You mentioned model minority myth, and
Yeah.
did I say that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, as a straight white dude, with all sorts of privilege, I've never actually heard model minority myth, so I'm just kind of curious if you explain to the audience what that is.
Yeah, so the idea of the model minority is that the like say Asian, specifically East Asian folk, and our collective say successes and are pitted against other minorities, say indigenous, black, brown folk, right? Of it's not systemic racism that's at play here, because look at these folks who are maybe in like growing up, I knew I could be in law, medicine, engineering, like, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
my family is in those realms. And so it's a sense of like they're not suffering from racism. Like look at this like tiny percentage of people who are succeeding. Um yeah. So that
Yeah, that
was
makes
not
sense.
an eloquent way to put
No, you're using a
it.
good example. I get it now. So,
Like
well, thank you.
a example of it.
Well, I want to read a quote. It's like a review of your book. I'm going to read the quote first about the book, and then I'll say who wrote it. So, someone wrote, "An absolute new favorite in my herbal library with countless tips for well-being. This book is meant to be used." So, you know who wrote that?
Yes, I'm sweating right now. I'm so
Well, congrats. Those were the words of Rosemary Gladstar. So, yeah, what an honor to have her, leave such a nice review of your book. So, can you just share a little bit about that?
yeah, being living in Sonoma County,
Hmm.
uh Rosemary Gladstar's influence in this region, specifically the California School of Herbal Studies, Rosemary's Garden in Sebastopol, traditional medicinals, tea, her books. She is like the OG. She's the godmother to me of Western North American herbalism. Is that fair?
Absolutely fair. Yeah.
I
Without a
mean, this
doubt.
this woman and my first ever book. I grew up in South Sacramento, which say is hood adjacent. And my grandpa Hiroshi at a little market, there was a health foods section, shampoos and different things. He bought me this book,
Oh, wow.
Rosemary's Family Herbals. The first,
Classic.
I was a teenager. Yeah. Um, so just on so many levels, her influence has really been profound in my world. Not directly, but through books and various things. And so I was really nervous to email her, but I did. I was like, oh, I'm gonna shoot for the stars.
Amen.
And she responded and she read it. And this woman, a literal angel on earth. I said in my email, I don't expect you to read the whole thing, but here's some chapters that I think are really good. And she wrote back after like a week, give me a week. She's like, I read the whole thing.
Really? She
Who
didn't just
does
kind
that?
of half-ass it, like, oh, yeah, great book.
I would have sent the cliff notes if I needed to, like whatever you need, Rosemary. No,
Right.
this and just so generous. She wrote so much feedback. Um, just so humbling. And before the book came out, I told my husband, I was like, I don't need to sell a book.
Right.
I
That's everything right there.
This is it. I am so honored and grateful.
Well, dear listener, if Rosemary Gladstar loves the book, definitely go check it out. Is there a we're still going to talk though, Aaron, all right? So this isn't the end of the convo yet, but where would you like to send folks to learn more about the book and buy it and everything?
Sure. So my website, herbfolkshop.com, there's a tab about the book, and it's available anywhere books are sold. And I'm encouraging community and friends to call your local bookshop to order it.
Awesome. Well, yeah, well, let's keep talking about the book. Anyways, I want to say in your book you have a mushroom rice wine vinegar. Because you posted about that on your Instagram account. You did a little video, which I'll also link to. Is that also at HerbFolk, by the way, your Instagram account?
Oh, Instagram's at herbfolkmedicine.
Okay, good. We'll link to that as well. But this one really piqued my interest. It just seems delicious. So I'm just kind of curious if you could tell the audience what that recipe is, how you make it, and then how you use it.
Sure. So the mushroom rice wine vinegar, it is a very simple recipe. I think it's in the seasonal wellness part of the book, and it speaks to the autumn season. And it's simply putting mushroom bits. It could be kitchen scraps. Ideally, it's kitchen scraps. We love
Totally.
kind of that thrifty kitchen
Grandma would be
medicine.
proud.
Yes, she would. It's definitely her vibe. So backing up, the essence, flavors of herbs and mushrooms really can be preserved quite nicely in vinegar. And so I like to use an unsweetened rice wine vinegar, chop up a few cups of mushrooms. It could be shiitake, maitake, lion's mane, button mushrooms, whatever is accessible.
Yeah.
Put it in a big glass jar and cover with unsweetened rice wine vinegar with a chopstick and kind of mix it up in there. Put a non-reactive lid, and then every few days shake it. And after 2 to 4 weeks, you can strain the mushrooms out and then just kind of put it in a beautiful bottle and have this whole experience with it. But honestly, personally, I'm like pouring off the vinegar when there's still mushrooms in it.
Oh
I'm
yeah, totally.
just kind of using it a little more loosey-goosey. And what I love about this recipe is that rice wine vinegar is used in sushi.
Mm,
So making like onigiri or just rice balls and seasoning it with some of the mushroom vinegar is really delicious, and it's a nice way to kind of get our herbs to our food.
that's a great idea. Make the sushi with the mushroom infused vinegar. What are you doing with the leftover mushrooms? Are you chopping those up and cooking with them, or do you just toss them, or how do you work with those?
Oh, interesting. I always toss them,
Okay.
compost.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't see any reason
but
why I guess you couldn't cook with them. Uh,
I've
maybe they
never
have
thought about that.
pickled mushroom. Yeah, yeah. I'm all about this thing called frugal nutrition. Get as much bang for your buck, as much nutrition as possible. And I think that'd be a good thing to do potentially, especially with those
I
hardier mushrooms.
I love that idea, and like even dicing them up and then mixing them into the rice
Oh
with the
yeah.
vinegar and make
Now we're talking.
now we're talking.
That'll go in the updated book edition. Perhaps, perhaps. Well, sweet.
Exactly.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, you did a in that recipe. I want to say you did shiitakes and lion's mane. Do you work with lion's mane very much?
I do because I there's a mushroom guy at our farmer's market, and
It's
he
the
always
best.
has lion's mane.
Yeah,
So for many,
local.
amongst other reasons, again, that accessibility,
Yeah,
like, oh, I can get this. Let's use it.
absolutely. Are there any other plants you'd like to highlight or talk about? Astragalus comes to mind, reishi. When I first started getting into herbalism, I was really into TCM, and I really liked Hoshu Wu, aka faux tea. So I'm just kind of
Oh,
curious if there's any particular plants or herbal remedies in the book that you'd like to highlight or talk about.
yeah. I think so. I do love the roots.
Mm.
Astragalus, Codonopsis, reishi, peony root. However, what really gets me going is our herbs like chrysanthemum.
I was going to ask you about chrysanthemum too, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, we can get into roots, but I think if I
Yeah.
had to share one thing, and I think this is a piece that's not maybe so common
Mm.
is herbs like chrysanthemum. If you look them up in the textbook, the TCM textbook, they're under the cold and flu section, release exterior.
Mm.
Other things in that section would be ginger, mint, honeysuckle, and then in the Western North American tradition, I think like yarrow, elderflower, things like that. So the first indication is cold and flu, which is great. And yes, they serve that purpose. Well, the second indication is generally that they move chi.
Mm.
They move energy in the body. And we know that chi or energy gets stuck when we're stressed out. You can even maybe feel that when we're stressed, our bodies start to tense, and especially right in our center, mid back pain in the middle back, things like that. And so I love using these simple herbs that can be infused in a tea, like chrysanthemum, to buffer and build resilience to everyday stress. And then traditionally, one more note on chrysanthemum, it's paired in a dui yao or a sister pair with goji berries, which, at least in California, most markets will have dried goji berries. And goji berries help to nourish fluids and blood in the body. And again, buffering and kind of creating this resilience to stress. So, whereas chrysanthemum speaks to the chi or the energy, goji speaks to the blood and body fluid. And together, it's this yin yang balance.
I used to be so obsessed with goji berries. Back in the day, I probably spent like half of my paycheck on goji berries. 20, $30 a pound or whatever it was.
I feel like goji berries, I mean, they're still cool, but they were
Yeah.
hot
Remember that?
for a
Yeah.
minute.
Seriously. I wonder what is the current hot herb? I can't even really think of one. I guess cannabis. I don't know, but it just feels like there was never a time like when goji berry was just the it herb. Like 2010, I want to say something like that.
Yes, when I was in acupuncture school, it was
Yeah.
like there was even jokes and memes about it. I mean, cannabis is kind of the evergreen,
Right.
like
Yeah, totally.
gateway herb into herbalism.
Totally.
The hot herb, well, during COVID, to me, being a TCM practitioner, it was Codonopsis, which is
Really?
also known as poor man's ginseng. People were, on Google, and I was getting some calls like, "Hey, do you carry Codonopsis?" Kind of surprising question
Right.
to field. Um, yeah, turmeric had a moment. I
Oh,
feel
that's
like
right. Yep.
that's waning, but it's
Yeah,
on there. I don't know. Maybe astragalus right now.
for sure. Do you talk about Codonopsis in your book?
I do a lot, yeah. Um, there's a huge section that's everyday ailments in the book, like anxiety, cold and flu, digestion. But my favorite section is prior to that is energetic healing, where I break down chi, blood, yin and yang, and herbs and recipes to cultivate wellness around those energetics. And Codonopsis is probably my top three herbs for that chi energetic healing. Yeah.
And going back to sustainability, you don't have to, be harvesting ginseng. You could get a lot of the same effect from Codonopsis. At least I don't know if you
Yeah.
see it that way. Or yeah, okay, sweet.
100% same page. I've never used ginseng in my clinical practice.
Wow,
I've always substituted Codonopsis for that exact reason.
that's awesome. Yeah, I want to say it probably has a lot of the same constituents. Also, when I worked at Mountain Rose Herbs, I would get Codonopsis, but then I'd also buy. I don't know if it's pronounced gynostemma or gynostemma, but I would always get gynostemma, and that one had ginsenosides in it as well, similar constituents, but they were always out of stock of that. So Codonopsis. So
You know it's good when it's out of stock.
right, right, exactly. Yeah, it was definitely trendy for a bit there too. Are
Mhm.
you looking it up?
I am. What is that in TCM? Oh yeah, no, I'm not familiar with it.
Hmm.
It's interesting. I did learn botanical names in school. I was a nerd that way, but I primarily learned pinyin, which is the Romanized Chinese form. So sometimes
Oh,
I'll just look up the botanical with pinyin and see.
I've never heard that term before. So that's the TCM way of calling an herb, as opposed to saying the genus or something like that.
Yeah. So, for example, astragalus is Huang Qi, but I don't know Chinese characters, so it's written in Romanized or English letters. So we can
Sometimes
change.
genuses become so common to say that I forget that that's actually the genus. Like astragalus is one. Yeah, that's astragalus membranaceous or something, and then gynostemma. Yeah, I forgot that's actually the genus as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do you have any advice to others that are looking to write either a book or an herbal book or anything like that? How was that process for you? I suspect everyone says it's incredibly challenging to birth a book.
It was, I love that you say, again, these like parent kind of connections.
Right?
I tell people birthing the book was more difficult for me personally than birthing my two children.
I don't doubt
I
it.
stand by that. Um, I would say that the best way to write a book is to start it now.
Right.
So I say that laughing, but truly, I um was writing and self-publishing little zines, like very
Oh,
punk rock, like just
totally.
stapling zines, like in my office. Again, that accessibility. How do we just get out this information? Uh, and so when a publisher and editor approached me about writing on Asian American herbalism, she was, "Do you have writing samples?" And I was able to say, "Yes, look at my beautiful zines." So that's, I think, the biggest thing is that if you want to write a book, then do it.
Yeah.
And start with the things that are your real, like, how do you want to say? Start with the things that you think are most important to your experience and perspective.
Yeah.
Don't hide those things away, and then just start posting about things freely. I mean, it was social media that connected me with the editor. Um, and yeah, so write it, share it. That's it.
So the publisher found you, like, say, through Instagram then, and then they reached out to you and said, "Hey, do you want to write this book?"
Yeah, and I don't have a big Instagram following, relatively. It was right time, right place,
Yeah.
and it was truly through networking on Instagram. Somebody who has a very big following uh, saw one of the workshops I was promoting, and so that's kind of how it all went down. But the it wasn't because of my Instagram following per se. It was more of because of how what I was writing about, the types of classes I was offering. So that's a part of it too. And it really does take, I think, it's so vulnerable and it can be so intimidating. I found it very intimidating to share so intimately and deeply of oneself.
Yeah.
Um, but that's kind of what led to the book.
Yeah, it's a very personal book for you, so I could see how that'd be healing in a lot of ways. And yeah, and thank you for bringing up, you don't have to have a large Instagram following to make a difference in the world. Obviously, there's a lot of herbalists, very experienced herbalists out there that have no social media following and still are creating epic books that'll be used for generations to come. So, and I want to say, don't downplay it too much. You got at least 10,000 followers from what I saw earlier today. That's pretty solid.
Yeah. I think I was reading an article recently about cookbooks,
Uh-huh.
a news article about cookbooks, and they were saying that if you have over 100,000 followers, like you're guaranteed a book deal. And I was just like, what world do we live in
Right.
where it's not necessarily the our embodied experience and knowing anyways? So I agree. Social media, if you have a following, use it to your
Yeah.
advantage.
Yeah.
But
Especially
just
when you could just buy followers, which leads to absolutely zero engagement. And so,
oh
you know what I mean? Someone has 100,000 followers, and then you look at their page and they're getting like one or two likes per post. It's obvious that who's buying followers and who's not.
that I didn't even realize you could buy followers, but
Oh,
that makes so much sense
yeah.
that people would do that. And also, I think, regardless of how you build, it is about, and I talk about community a lot. And I think one of the upsides of social media is I found you can cultivate community connection through social,
Yeah.
you know. So yeah.
Absolutely. Is that kind of what herb folk means? Does that have to do with like the herb community, or what does that the business name mean to you?
Yeah. The idea of uh, first and foremost folk medicine,
Hmm.
even though I come from a clinical traditional Chinese medicine background, the heart of my practice is East Asian folk medicine, the medicine that we cultivate at home,
Hmm.
grandma's kitchen, garden, community spaces. And then also when I created the name Herb Folk, probably about 10 years ago, I was deep into like intersectional feminism and critical race theory. And uh, I liked it as a non-gendered term to talk about
Oh, yeah,
the community of herb people. So
absolutely.
yeah,
Well, I guess you go for it.
that was the root of it.
I like it. I guess since we're on the topic, what else do you do through herb folk? I want to say acupuncture, clinical herbalist. Yeah.
Hmm.
Herbal products. Like, what else do you do over there at herb folk?
So I currently am not practicing acupuncture
Okay.
with the pandemic and shutting down my clinic. I haven't rebuilt that since, in part to finish writing the book and also just how much capital and how much energy it takes to start a brick and mortar business. So I do offer some virtual herbal consultations, and then I have the product line. So that's Asian American Herbalism and tea. This last year or 2023, I traveled to Japan for the first time,
Nice.
and which was it really that was really healing. And I visited a tea farm in southern Japan, Kyushu, which
Hmm.
is where my maternal lineage is from.
Wow.
And so built some like friendships there, and I'm starting to import just like a small amount of different green teas from that region. So that's all on my website. There's the book, and then I'm really excited and honored to be teaching at Verse, which we talked about online, and then the California School of Herbal Studies in Forestville.
There's that rosemary connection again, too. Yeah, I was telling you pre-call that we visited the California school. I want to say it was April 2022. Got to hang out with David Hoffman, but what a gorgeous campus. I mean, it was raining the entire time we were there, but just like looking around was like absolutely incredible. So, are you actually going there and teaching in person, or are these like online offerings?
I am. So at Verse, it's all virtual.
That's right.
Again, incredible for accessibility.
Yeah,
People are around the world tapping into Verse.
that's
The
awesome.
California School of Herbal Studies, to your point, I mean, just like even the learning garden
Right.
and that being able to touch grass, as the youth say, like,
Well played.
you know.
Yeah.
Uh, and so when they brought me in to both schools to kind of step in for the previous traditional Chinese medicine teacher, both schools, and this is my brag, invited me to teach Asian American herbalism, which again, I was sharing earlier in our conversation, like is something that was such a profound shift in language for me just 4 years ago. So to be asked by schools that I respect so much to like, hey, do you want to share on this? Is I'm so proud of that.
That's amazing. Congrats on all your successes. This has been a quite the past couple of years for you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been wild, right? It's been a wild ride.
I really like this call it the following the golden thread, kind of like when you feel intuition or instinct, you follow your curiosities and just like good things just start piling up and happening to you because you're just following your interest, you're following that golden thread. And it just seems like you're a perfect example of someone who's been doing that.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
And just having the faith and the trust, because it can be scary. I would imagine I was watching kind of your journey as well with
Yeah,
HerbRally and the community you've called in. And it can be quite scary, but I love that idea of like trusting that golden thread.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it got to the point where I would have these like nagging thoughts just over and over again, like these creative ideas, these bursts of energy of anytime I would think about it, I'd get excited, but I would just push it back because I'd be scared or like, oh, that'll never work. And then once I kind of just started going with it, everything just kind of fell into place. And there's probably some luck to attribute to that, but at the same time, no, even if Herb Rally didn't end up where it is now, I would still, I think, be much happier for at least trying, because then who wants to live with these regrets? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it's like the harder you work, the luckier you get, right?
Right. I like
Like
that.
just to like reflect what I see in your work is that there's a lot of people in the herb world in very different ways,
Yeah.
and your presence feels very authentic and
Thank you.
exciting. So congratulations as well.
Thank you. I try to be. I
Hmm.
mean, yeah, it took me forever to work up the courage to just put myself even on camera. I'm like, but what if they don't like me? But no, it's been quite the blessing. So I appreciate that. Feel free to, not accept this question, but I was, reading in your book about the cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. And I just think that's such an important topic, especially to talk about in the herbal community. So if you've got some sort of statement on that, if you want to recall what you wrote in the book to some degree, could you share about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So I think the first few things, an invitation for community and for us all to feel a sense of belonging. I think especially with something like traditional Chinese medicine, which is a historical, sophisticated system of medicine, not necessarily a spiritual practice, that and knowing and that learning is available and accessible to everyone. And I think it stands to benefit people from every culture. Asian American herbalism, my greatest hope is that for people who are of Asian heritage, they see maybe their families, their life reflected in my words, and it gives them a sense of pride or maybe curiosity about digging deeper into their heritage. That is a beautiful thing. But even for people who don't identify as Asian, that my words and my writing might still inspire that sense of curiosity and joy, an interest in identity herbalism for themselves.
Hmm.
So I want to start there.
Little
And
prerequisites.
and uh what's up with cultural appropriation? I think that's what I originally it got edited out through the rounds of edits, but that was, it was like, what's up with cultural appropriation? It's more of a question
Hmm.
than a statement,
Hmm.
because I don't feel that I have the authority on like what's appropriate and what's not. But I think it is important. I appreciate you asking the question. What to say about cultural appropriation or the kind of act of taking or misrepresenting or misusing elements from another culture, specifically for financial gain,
Hmm.
which has been going on all since the beginning of time, and it still is. And I think this is really harmful when things are repackaged in a way or sold where it's not just removing the cultural context, but making it seem like the changes are going to make it more valid or cleaner or better. Uh, the disrespect,
Oh.
that's where things really can cross a line. And I think where we maybe move towards cultural appreciation, because we can tear things down all day long. Well, where do we go from here? And the only thing that I've found that really sits well in my heart is this idea of a cross-cultural exchange, of doing the inner work,
Hmm.
of not just simply claiming, well, I've been given a pass or permission to do this work, and so that's what it is. More of a sense of like, hey, I've learned in this lineage, this tradition, this is the work I do, and this is what I'm bringing to it. Or these are the questions I have, or actually, this is kind of where I've taken it, and sharing in a cross-cultural way, and this idea of reciprocity, to bring forward like that vulnerability and a mutual sharing, I think is the way kind of uh, through and around cultural appropriation, because there is herbalism from every culture, and that knowledge and wisdom can benefit all of us.
Yeah.
So it's less about, I think, saying that's mine, and more about saying, like, how can we share in a way that's really mutually beneficial and respectful?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think bringing up the money aspect definitely hits home. Like I think about certain people selling, white sage. I feel like white sage is definitely one of those hot button topics and hot button topics. And yeah, that's definitely been used, for monetary gain for certain folks when maybe they shouldn't necessarily be selling white sage, but it's kind of what I think about. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's one answer. It's just,
No.
and even kind of tying back into the idea of Asian American herbalism, one of my fears in writing the book is that it would be perceived that I was trying to say that I was the authority on the Asian American experience, or I have the final word on this is Asian American herbalism in a perfect box.
Right.
And really, it's always been my intention, and it remains that um, maybe this is, if not the start of the conversation, just a piece of the conversation into Asian American herbalism and just this idea of identity herbalism and cultivating a sense of our cultural connections to the earth.
Absolutely. Yeah, the book for you was a very personal project, and I like that you're saying that you're not the final thought on this huge topic, which you could never write a long enough book about. I mean, there's so many different traditions, and this is just your perspective. And yeah, I'm excited for the folks to read it. And so, dear listener, please go support Erin's work. Check out Asian American Herbalism at a bookshop near you. There it is for you YouTube listeners. Beautiful book, by the way. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Erin. Thanks for joining us. Do you have any parting words of advice for the audience or any closing thoughts before we get out of here?
If you are watching this on YouTube or you're on your phone, go outside and touch grass.
I like it. Get out there in nature, y'all. Very good. Perfect way to wrap up. So thanks once again, Erin. Thanks y'all for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Herbalist Hour.
Thank you so much.
And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the HerbRally podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us here at HerbRally, we now have a text message community, believe it or not. Basically, it's just updates from us. We send about 1 to 7 texts per week, notifying you about new events, videos, courses, podcasts. You get the idea. It's pretty much like our email newsletter, just in text form. So if you'd like to receive text messages from HerbRally, just text JOIN, that's JOIN, to the number 541-256-2895. Again, that's JOIN to number 541-256-2895. And to stop receiving texts, that's easy too. Just text STOP to the same number. It'll opt you out immediately. Okay, thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your day.